Hey friends, how are you? And welcome to Crimes with Cole. So, hello. How are you guys doing today? I hope you all are having an amazing day. So, in today's case, we will be talking about the decision that forever changed this boy's life. He was trying to escape hell at home and ended up in a new hell of his own. This is the case of Jane Bautista. Jane Bautista was a student at the university at the age of 19. She was studying to be a teacher, and that is when she had met a handyman named Armando. The two quickly fell in love. Jane and Armando had gotten married months later, despite his family's concerns about her, but Armando didn't care. He did whatever it took to make Jane happy. Jane wasn't close to her mother, but she did keep in touch with her father and sister. When the newlywed couple returned to Wisconsin, Armando tried finding work as a handyman, and Jane continued her studies at the university, although she had never graduated because she started working instead, since the couple had struggled financially. Just like some of you crazy lovebirds do, you go out and get married on love and a dime, and that's what Armando and Jane did. But, they made it work, like most of you probably do. On August 25th, 1982, Armando and Jane welcomed their first son, Jason, into the world. Jane had reconnected with an old friend named Joy that would babysit baby Jason when Jane had returned to work. But when Jane had discovered that Jason had a diaper rash one day after she picked him up from Joy's house, she quickly pulled him out of Joy's care and forbid her to watch him any longer. In August 1983, Jane had left Armando. This was to no surprise because the two were constantly fighting and screaming at one another. Jane moved into another apartment with baby Jason, and Armando begged and pleaded that Jane come back. He wanted their family and he couldn't live without them and wasn't going to take no for an answer. On May 7th of 1984, so 8 months after Jane has moved out, she had arrived to work and she noticed Armando's car sitting in the parking lot. She's confused and curious why his car was there, so she had parked next to it, got out, and walked around to find Armando sitting in the passenger seat, slumped over. He had taken his own life. She had slung the passenger door open, grabbed Armando, shaking him, and noticed a handgun on the passenger floor. She ran to the security office and the police were called. Armando had been there for 3 hours, the time Jane had found him. He had left a 2-page suicide note behind, blaming Jane, telling her how he couldn't live without her and he wasn't going to. What a horrible feeling to have to live with. Now, Armando's family really didn't like Jane and even blamed her for Armando's death. But Jane still kept in contact with his sister because of baby Jason. And Armando's sister felt the same way. That was her nephew. She still wanted to see him, so she sucked it up and dealt with Jane. Jane had met a man named Jose, and soon after, like 3 months soon after, he had moved in with Jane and Jason. Now, Jose noticed just how up and down Jane's mood swings were and how awful her anger problems had become. Jane hated Armando. Like with a passion, hated that man. And she would project that anger that she had built up still onto baby Jason. Even if Jose paid attention to this little boy, this little innocent boy, Jane would get mad. And when Jason was just 3 years old, he was still wetting the bed. And every time he woke up with wet bed sheets, Jane would just lay into him. I mean, he's 3. He's going to have accidents. But that embarrassed her. She was embarrassed by it, so she figured that if she would beat it out of him. And this drove Jose crazy because Jose grew up with an abusive alcoholic father, and he knew what it was like to get your tail end busted for no good reason, just because your parents wanted to. And Jose would try to intercept. Jane would fly into this angry rage at Jose because Jason wasn't Jose's son. So she would tell him, don't worry about how I raise my son. Don't worry about how I punish my kid. Jose couldn't stand it anymore, and he was ready to leave. Like, the ups and downs were too much for him. But right before he was ready to walk out the door, Jane told him she's pregnant. Jose did what some foolish men do and asked her to marry him while she was pregnant. But Jane said no, because she didn't want her Social Security benefits to end. Baby Matthew was born on July 4th of 1987. Happy 4th of July to them. When Matthew came home, he was the one to receive all the hugs and kisses and the loving side of Jane, while Jason still received all of the smacks and the hollers and the mean side of Jane. Jane finally had confessed to Jose about Armando, and that she didn't just find Armando in his car that afternoon, but was in fact in the car with him. They were fighting right before he had pulled out a gun and took his own life, while baby Jason was in the back seat. So she snatched up baby Jason from the back seat and fled the scene, only to return to tell the security guards. I mean, how true all of that is, I don't know. I don't know why you would have left for a few hours, why you wouldn't have panicked, grabbed the baby, and then ran to the security office to tell them, oh my God, my husband just shot himself. But that is the story she had told Jose. Now, on January 1988, Jane had gone to visit her parents. She came home and she just started venting to Jose about how she hated them and never wanted to see them again. Now, while she's complaining to Jose about her parents, she picked up baby Matthew and dropped him on purpose. This infuriated Jose, and he grabbed up that baby and he smacked Jane across the face and told her if she ever acted like that again toward his son, he was going to knock some sense into her. The two's toxic relationship struggled as they were constantly fighting with one another. But when the two had gotten into a physical altercation one night, Jane had grabbed a knife and threatened Jose, telling him if he ever left, she would kill him. The cops were called by the neighbors, and Jose was arrested on assault charges. A few months later, Jane had petitioned to have those charges dropped, and they were. But, by this point, the relationship is so toxic and unhealthy that it's basically ruined. There's no going back. There's no rekindling anything at this point. Jose tried to make it work the best he could at that point, even though mentally, he was done. Jane felt like they needed a new start, and the family took a vacation to Florida. While they were down there, Jane didn't want to return home. So they extended their stay to an entire month. It took an entire month for Jose to convince Jane that they had to go back home. They had a home there. They had jobs. They had things, like they weren't planning to just up and move to Florida. They were just taking a vacation. So they ended up going back home. Now, Jane was still very consistent on this, we need a new start, we need a new start. So, with her consistency, the family ended up moving to San Marco in 1988 because she just felt this new start was needed. Jane started acting weird after the family had settled into their new apartment in San Marco, only making them eat salads and vegetables for meals and still continuing to only give Matthew affection. Now, Jason is about 6 years old at this point and Matthew is 1. By the early 90s, Jane grew paranoid that Jose was cheating on her and would go through his belongings repeatedly. I'm sure some of you know what that feels like. I mean, she would go through his coat, his wallet, the dresser, drawers, anything that Jose used on a daily basis, anything that he touched, she was going through. I mean, she was snooping through everything. And while she was snooping one time, she found a number in Jose's coat pocket. So she called the number and a woman answered, except the number was a male coworker. Now, this is back in the 90s, so landlines were a thing, a big thing. You know, his wife probably just happened to pick up the phone. But Jane flipped out, as we can all imagine, and grabbed the knife, started threatening Jose with it, and then started stabbing his clothes with it. You know, at this point, Jose's done. He packed his bags and he was ready to leave again. But before he made it to the door, Jane told him that if he walks out that door, she will call the police and tell them that he has been sexually abusing Matthew, this woman. Whew. The relationship finally came to an end when Jose had been sentenced to a year for pleading guilty to a spousal abuse charge. Probably the best year of his life, but unfortunately, when his year was up, he had called Jane and at that point, the line was disconnected and he never got to see those boys again. Now, single mother Jane and her 2 boys were off on their own. Jane's grandmother had been sending checks monthly to her to help support her and the boys. Jane finally found a place for her and the boys to settle down, but the neighbors felt Jane was stuck up and felt she was like better than everyone else. She didn't have many friends, and she would usually only go out at night and never really during the day. And this led her to becoming the main topic of all the gossip on the street. The neighbors came up with the nickname Trixie because Jane was always going out dressed like a trick, so you could see where Trixie would be suitable. It is not proven that's what Jane was doing. That was just porch talk. Aside from this, they also noticed how Jane was treating her boys. One of the neighbors, Rosemary, noticed one of the boys sitting on the steps to their house crying. So Rosemary went over to the boy and asked him what was wrong, and he had told her that he was locked out of the house because he had made his mother mad. So she told him to go outside and she locked him out. One time, Jason had bought these cards, similar to like Pokemon cards. They cost him $1. And when Jane found out, she flipped out because Jason wasn't supposed to have any money. How did he get money if she didn't give it to him and he doesn't work? So how else would he have gotten these cards? Jane grabbed a belt and whipped it at him, and the tail end of the belt had hit him in the eye, causing his eye to swell up and bruise. Now, later on that year, Jane took the boys to Vegas. They got to go to Vegas, which is like a 6-hour drive from their home. During this trip, Jason had turned the TV on, and there was a musician named Duncan Sheik performing his hit song, I Can Barely Breathe. Jane stood in shock, staring at the TV, and told Jason how one night she had met Duncan in a bar, and now he is singing a song that she wrote. And he's getting rich off of this song. He stole from her, and now he wants to kill her. Duncan wants to kill Jane. That's what she's telling her son at this point. She goes as far as to get in contact with Duncan, but naturally, being a musician, she never gets a hold of him. So she tells everybody that he's just avoiding her and had sent his people to spy on her. And she wholeheartedly believed this. I mean, she would quit going out during the daytime, period, because she felt that Duncan's people were watching her. Her paranoia went into full effect this year. I mean, she believed there was a whole list of people that wanted her dead. She pinpointed Mexicans and Jews, thinking that they, in particular, were always out to get her. I mean, she even told her neighbors that there was someone in her backyard stalking her. Naturally, they believed her at first, but when she would call them continuously to come back and check, they never found anything. And she would tell them, as, she pointed to a bush, "Look, can't you see? They've been staying behind this bush spying on me." I mean, she was paranoid. By this point, Jason is 14 years old and Matthew is 9 years old. So you can only imagine how embarrassing this is for the two boys to have a mother who is, losing it. She's basically losing it. And it's everyone around can see. She moved those boys all over. She felt everyone was stalking her, or like the neighbors were pedophiles, and so they were trying to get her and they needed to move again. The boys weren't allowed to play or even go outside because people were always spying on them, according to Jane. And she would always tell the boys how they aren't going to amount to anything and they're going to be losers just like their fathers. They moved from apartment to apartment every couple of months. I mean, if they couldn't find an apartment available, then they would live in a hotel. And as soon as Jane would feel paranoid at the hotel, they would live in their car. I mean, these boys didn't have any structure whatsoever. They were basically living out of a bag. And Jason, bless his heart, felt somewhat obligated to try his hardest to make somewhat of a structured, normal life for Matthew and make sure that Matthew was okay and that Matthew was protected and taken care of like good big brothers usually do. Now, even though it has been years and years, Jane still hated Jason because she still hated Armando, even after all those years. I mean, it's been well over a decade now. She would fight with Jason just like she would fight with Armando. One of these times, the neighbors had recorded all of the screaming and yelling Jane did at those boys and called CPS. CPS came to the house. Jane told them, "Get the F off my property," slammed the door in their face, and they did. And they left and they never revisited the house. Not the next day or a few days later. Why CPS never does their job? I think some of us still ask that and never get an answer. But despite how Jason and Matthew's home life was, Jason was actually a really good student. And Matthew did amazing at sports, especially hockey. Many of Matthew's teammates on the hockey team would ask him, to have a sleepover, but of course Jane said no. She would go to hockey practices, telling all these other parents how there were these powerful people out to get her. When the parents didn't believe her, she started telling them that those powerful people must have gotten to you and convinced them that, they all should gang up against Jane. In the early 1990s, Jason's now 16, had enough credits to graduate high school a year early. And he was so happy about this because he wanted to start college early so he could ultimately attend Harvard. Jane, shockingly, signed the form for Jason to graduate early, telling him that she had graduated high school early. Now, Matthew, though, was kicked off of the hockey team, even though he was a phenomenal player. But because of Jane and her manic episodes, the coach just said he could no longer have Matthew on the team. I mean, Jane was going to these practices just arguing and fighting with parents all the time, and the coach was done with it. When Jason found this out, he was pissed. Their mother had ruined the one thing that Matthew is amazing at and loves to do. He told her she was crazy. So what does she do? She runs into the kitchen, she grabs a knife and starts, swinging it around, threatening Jason with it. So Jason grabbed a hockey stick because it was near, but Jane threw the knife down, grabbed the hockey stick from Jason and whacked him upside the head, busted his head open. He needed stitches at this point, so, he's rushed to the hospital. And when he gets to the hospital, they obviously ask him what happened, and he just told the doctors that, him and his brother were messing around and it was an accident. Because Jane told Jason that if you tell them what happened, then I'm going to tell them that you have been sexually assaulting your brother while I've been gone. Jane and the boys moved again and constantly all over the place, making it hard for Matthew to attend school 5 days a week. But Jane didn't care. She just wanted Matthew to be safe from all of these powerful people that were trying to get them. Jason himself even started having difficulty in school and was placed on academic probation. And he was doing extremely well in school for all those years. Now, Jason and Matthew just begged their mother. They begged her, please just get an apartment and give us a stable life. Jason had gotten to stick up his tail end once and told Jane he was going to move out. He had been working and thought he would just go off on his own, get settled, and then bring Matthew and give them some stability in life. It wasn't even a week that went by, and Jason had ended up back with his mom and brother. But, what do you expect when you have never truly been exposed to just how much it is to go out on your own? This kid is going to school full time and has an unstable home life and working probably a job that isn't paying a tremendous amount of money. And Jane made sure to rub it in his face every chance she got, that he just couldn't survive without her and how stupid he was to think that he could. Jason would often watch his favorite TV show, The Sopranos, on his computer while he was at school. And Matthew would join him whenever he could. Jason convinced his mom for months and months to just get an apartment, and finally Jane had gotten an apartment and moved the three of them in. Now, this apartment had nothing in it. Nothing. There was no couch. There was no table and chairs to eat supper at. There were no beds to sleep in. They slept in sleeping bags. There's no internet, no cable. There was a TV. Matthew would hook up his video games and play his video games on it, and that's how it remained. And Jane wasn't in a hurry to furnish it, but the boys didn't care because it was a place that they could call home. This didn't stop Jason from having hate-filled feelings he had towards his mother. He started making comments to Matthew like, I wish mom was dead, or wouldn't life be better if mom wasn't here? Just to see how Matthew would react, because at this point, Jason now is thinking of some way to get them out of the situation. And in order to make the situation better, they need to get rid of the problem, and their mom is the problem. Matthew would agree that life would be better, but not because their mother would be dead, just because she wouldn't be there. If they could get away from their mom, then life would be easier for them. For once, life seemed to be going good for the boys until October 2002, when Jane said that the man next door was a pedophile and after her and Matthew. Jason was about to lose his mind. Everything was fine and great Why is she doing this again, messing it all up? Jason tried to reason with her, but Jane turned the tables and accused Jason of molesting his little brother. Jason finally told his brother, we have to make a decision. Mom needs to go. We could live off the checks that grandma are sending us, but mom has got to go. He needed Matthew's help, though, to hold her down. Matthew said, I can't do that. I'm not against your plan to get rid of mom, but I can't participate in it. Jason then turned to plan B. He was just gonna get his mom all pissed off and then fight back this time, and at a certain point would tell Matthew to go into the bedroom and then go from there. That way Matthew wasn't around. So on January 14th, 2003, Jason came home after a long day at school, waiting for the perfect moment. And sure enough, his mom came into the living room and started complaining, and Jason just responded to egg her anger on. He got her so worked up. The two are in a full-blown screaming match at this point, and Matthew went into the bedroom and sat with the small dog that the family had and turned the TV up super loud. 15 minutes later, he had heard a loud thump and just sat there watching the TV, not moving. Jason had hit Jane upside the head and then got on top of her and had, strangled her. When he went into the bedroom afterwards to let Matthew know that their mom was gone, Matthew's panicking at this point, saying, what do we do next? And Jason said, well, we have to do what they did on The Sopranos and get rid of her. So Jason went to the store and got all the supplies that he needed, and he took his mother's body into the bathroom. He put her over the side of the tub so that it looked like she was leaning over the tub, like the tub came up to the corner of her waistline, and then her head was in the tub and her legs were on the outside, almost like you're kneeling down next to the bathtub, leaning over it, like your head's over the bathtub. Matthew stood there panicking still, and Jason told him, just go into the other bedroom and don't come out until I come get you. So Jason was in this bathroom for hours with his mother. He had cut off all of her hair, went into the kitchen, got the butcher knife, and had cut her head, started cutting off her head, and drained almost all of the blood out of her body. And then he had cut off her hands and her feet. He had wrapped her up in a sleeping bag, then went and told Matthew that he needed help getting her body into the car. They were going to go dump her in this neighborhood, but someone interrupted them and they told him to F off. So they went to the ravine and dumped her body there. Jason had then taken her head, her hands, and her feet and put them in a duffel bag and put the duffel bag in the closet. Now, Matthew didn't know any of this because, the last time he saw his mom, she was all intact. And then he saw her all wrapped up in the sleeping bag and helped carry her to the trunk. So he never saw that she was dismembered. The police were called because that guy that interrupted them got the license plates number from the car and reported some suspicious behavior. And Jason was arrested 9 days later for the murder of Jane. Matthew had pled guilty to being an accomplice because he helped dispose of the body, but he didn't actually murder her. Matthew was sentenced to about 2 years, and Jason was sentenced to 25 years and told the judge that he doesn't feel he should be charged with first-degree murder, but manslaughter, because it was self-defense. His mom was attacking him, and they came back and proved that the bruising on Jane's, head and face and the strangulation marks on her neck were not consistent with that story. But how crazy is that? It's a shame when people who have mental health issues do not receive the help they need, because had someone have just stopped Jane and took her to get some help, the outcome of the boys' lives, even Jane's, could have been a whole lot different. So if you know someone with mental health issues, don't just ignore them, and definitely try to get them the resources that they need, because it's no joke. And these boys, I mean, they did not deserve to have that type of life. This is a sad case. It's very, very sad, because those poor boys grew up a hard life. So hopefully they get some counseling and some help that they need for themselves, for having to have been through all of that as a child. You know, that really just as a child. But let me know what you guys think. And please remember, until next time, to be safe, and I will see you then. Bye.